Meta AI is the personal AI to help you with whatever you need. Plus, it meets you where you are. Not only is Meta AI now an app, but it's also on the apps you already know and love: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Plus the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. It's easy to access wherever you are. So whether you're talking or texting, Meta AI is convenient to use throughout your day. Experience our newest AI that's tailored to you by downloading the Meta AI app. Try the Meta AI app today on the Apple App Store and Google Play.
This podcast is brought to you by TeamTrade, a digital solution that helps you hire, optimize, and retain employees. Using psychometric assessments to identify more than 100 professional mindset traits, it gives instant reports you can use to build high-performing teams. Get 2 free profiles today, no commitment, no credit card required, at teamtrait.com. TeamTrait.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
You know, Lee, part of being a manager is working with human resources professionals. It's handling staff, and it can be, I think, particularly challenging if you are a middle manager. So you're managing up and you're managing down. But HR in 2024 is more complex than ever, and that's our topic for today. And we've never done this topic before, and I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, and what's amazing about it too is that they're doing all this on a shoestring budget. Most of them. I mean, it's like I don't know too many HR departments or whatever that are staffed the way that they feel like they need to be staffed and have all the money to do, to buy the tools that they need to be able to carry out their stated function. So it's always a challenge for those types of people, but also as managers and leaders, as far as how we view HR, how we work with HR, there's definitely some ways in which we could be doing that better, and we hope to explore some of that today.
Absolutely. So welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. My name is Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Sales Fuel.
Okay, so on deck today is Kathi Enderes, Senior Vice President of Research at the Josh Bersin Company, and she is here to discuss systemic HR. That is a multi-year study that includes analysis of HR strategies from more than 1,000 companies and 26 million employees across all industries and geographies. You talk about data wonk. Kathi is your gal. Organizations now face complex post-industrial age challenges that have HR at the heart of them. And we've talked about AI on some of these other shows. It's going to come up today, along with designing hybrid work approaches, redesigning job roles with AI in mind, and navigating through ongoing huge societal movements. What about, I don't want to work in an office anymore. I want to work from home. I mean, I could go on, but Kathi, thank you for coming. And I just got to say, I can't wait to hear what the data is showing you. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And managers, it's really close to my heart because managers and leaders are really at the heart of everything that we do in HR and in leading organizations. So thrilled to talk with you about that.
One of the things that I don't see enough of in the people that we consult is I don't see that managers are getting proper training on how to be managers. So many times they're promoted from other roles. And basically, what they're doing is that they're not just getting a job change, they're getting a career change, essentially. What made them successful in their prior role does not make them successful automatically in management. Same thing applies to leadership as well. And I'm not seeing really enough training and, things like that there. I'm kind of wondering if AR faces a similar situation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we see this all the time. And unfortunately, we know this in HR, but oftentimes we can't change it very easily to have a full career path for people to move into expert roles who might not want to be managers. We see this all the time in sales positions, for example, and I know you're talking about sales. The best salespeople oftentimes get promoted to be sales managers, and they really don't want to be sales managers because all they love is doing selling, right? And now they have to talk with their staff, they have to coach them, they have to spend less time being with prospects or with clients. Same thing, of course, with software engineers. Lots of times that the best software engineers then get promoted and they stop writing great code and they have to talk all day long with their direct reports and coach them and be in meetings all the time. Same situation happens in healthcare, for example, nurse managers. I used to work in healthcare for a long time, and nurse manager was always the hardest job to fill because it was not why somebody went into nursing to be a manager and do a lot of administrative stuff and scheduling and kind of shift switches and administrative paperwork. So totally true that lots of times the only way to progress in organizations is to be in management roles, but not the best position to be in. I mean, the other thing too that we see in HR lots of times and that we're trying to rectify in good HR organizations is um, does anybody want to be a manager? And is it an actual job? And do you want to actually be prepared? We see some statistics that the younger generation now actually doesn't want to be a manager. They say, no, I'm not doing this. So we see less and less desires in the Generation Z and the youngest generation in the workplace to actually go into management positions because they say, it doesn't seem to be a good job, right? I mean, I don't know. The pay is not much better. I have less time. I have less time to do what I wanted to do with my life. So they said when they are offered management positions, lots of times they say, "No, thank you, I'm not going."
So how's HR countering that? I mean, how's it, what strategies does HR have to implement then to deal with, young people not wanting to take the roles of retiring managers, for example, or managers that move on?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do for HR, of course. And what we have to do in HR then is to really think deeply and explore our workforce. Could we, for example, offer managers who might want to retire some kind of part-time role, some kind of gig role to train the younger generation or to basically support the younger generation and also to sweeten up the deal, honestly, for the younger generation to say, well, what would it look like if that role was interesting to you? What's not interesting for you? And how can we help you? And how can we prepare you to do that? There's no easy cut and dry answer, but organizations are trying some very interesting things. They are trying to, for example, to do job sharing with of younger generations with older generations in the management positions where somebody who might be close to retirement to say, well, I'll still stick around, but only for half of the time because I want to ease out of the workforce. And the younger manager might say, well, if I can learn together with this other person and if I can be mentored by them, maybe it is not so bad after all.
So 18 practice areas are under the systemic HR umbrella. I would love
Yeah.
to hear from you when this data started aggregating. What were maybe one or two data points that came through that just kind of blew your mind or were unexpected?
Yeah, I mean, when we set out to do this study, we had a theory, we had a hypothesis that HR in this new age where every problem that we're talking about, and we just talked about new managers and management development and how hard it is to be a manager, that all of these problems are not single solution problems. So you might say, well, getting new managers might be a training issue. And of course it is, right? Because you're going to train them up. But there's also a recruiting challenge because when you hire somebody new, for example, you might look for, does this person eventually want to be a manager or how can you prepare them to be a manager? It's also going to be a workforce kind of balancing perspective as we talked about when we talked about the job sharing. Could also be a workforce planning exercise when you say who has the skills, who has the capabilities. So when we set out, we knew that every single problem that we now tackle in HR is not a single domain function. So in other words, we built our HR departments in single domains. We said, here's the recruiting department, here's the learning and development department, here's the total rewards, the compensation and benefits department, here's the workforce planning team. But really what HR needs to do is work together across all of these domains and work together with the business to create the solutions to the business problems like the shortage of managers, for example. So we set out with this hypothesis, and while this was true, what really surprised us is how early on, how immature many of the HR departments are through no fault sometimes of their own because and you mentioned it before too because they might not get the right budget, they might not get the right leadership support, they might not get the executive commitment to actually make that impact. So we uncovered that most HR departments are still very early on in their journey to become more systemic, where they work across the business, work across different HR domains, use technology, use AI to the way that it supports them to identify problems, dive deeper into understanding what these business problems are, assigning the right resources, and then kind of connecting the business into that as well. And then kind of disbanding these kind of agile teams. Most HR organizations are still very hierarchically organized, very siloed in their domain.
So I was in our show prep where we came across a stat we thought was very interesting that you've created this thing based off of the data called systemic HR, and you say that it's 12 times more likely to accomplish high workforce productivity, 7 times more likely to adapt to change. So what is this framework that you call systemic HR?
Yeah, so this framework includes everything that you do in the HR organization, from setting your strategy, your HR and people strategy that's aligned with your business strategy and aligned with your culture. So really saying first and early on, what are we focusing on in HR? What are the problems that we need to solve? What is your people strategy? What are our priorities for this year? And of course, that needs to be tied to your business strategy. How do we measure all of this? A great example there is on the business aligned HR and people strategy is New York Presbyterian, a very large healthcare system in New York. And they say our success metrics for HR is not just how quickly hire people, how many managers or how many people we train, those kind of HR internal metrics, but our success metrics are if the business is actually meeting their overall business goals and the business objectives for the year, which for them this year they're focusing on digitally transforming healthcare and expanding their footprint in using and leveraging AI to create better patient outcomes. And they say we succeed in HR only if the business is successful. So that's our success measure. So that's the first step. The second step is thinking about how you operate the HR functions. Who is accountable for what? Who are our customers, our internal customers, of course, but how do we serve them? And how do we deliver high quality and low cost service as well? But the high quality, low cost service used to be the primary means and the primary objective of HRB departments before. In the systemic HR model, it's more table stakes. And you're really thinking much more about, okay, yeah, of course we need to deliver services, but how do we align to the right problems? How do we see around corners? How do we get data in to actually anticipate what's coming along? So that's the integrated HR operating model. And sorry, okay, let's turn this off. Sorry. In the next area that HR needs to work on is what we call dynamic HR work. And what that means is creating the right capabilities within the HR function and the HR practitioners to focus on the right problems, to focus on the business strategy, to create kind of these, what we call full stack HR capabilities. We took that from full stack engineers that know kind of everything from the front end to back end, and full stack HR practitioners also know everything around the business. So they're very business oriented, they're very close to consulting with the business, but then they also understand deeply each of the domains of HR to pull the right levers to support the business. Then we think about what jobs HR has, how the role of HR leadership changes, how CHROs, the senior most HR leaders, sit alongside and at the table with the C-suite, take that C-suite role and have kind of wear the people hat, but they're not just executing on what the C-suite decided on, but really like a full member, and in some cases, actually the most important support system for the CEO themselves. We talked with the CEO of L'Oreal, obviously a very large global company, and she told us that her most important go-to person is the CHRO. It's no longer just the CIO, the CFO. It's really the CHRO. And that's kind of what we mean by systemic HR as well. And then, of course, you need to think about how you organize HR, what's your organizational structure, but that kind of more agile organizational model is really not so important. Most of the time, a lot of times, HR organizations want to start with the org structure. We always tell them, finish with the organization structure, who reports to whom. Once you do the right work, once you put the business in the right ways, the organization structure will follow. And then last but not least, very, very important area is what we call employee first HR technology. And what that really means is the HR technology needs to serve the employees and the leaders of the organization more so than just HR administration. Very big mindset shift to focus on the employee experience, not just on administrative processes that HR supports. And then most important, maybe one of the many important areas of employee first HR technology is how do we get analytics and insights out to HR to really kind of understand the problems very deeply that we're trying to address, quantify them, and then assign the right resources and kind of basically use these analytics, these people analytics, to create business value for the business. So you talked about productivity, for example, performance, financial performance. Mm-hmm. Those are the outcomes that we can accomplish in HR when we focus on systemic HR.
Is this a model that can be used for SMBs, small businesses? Because this seems like you have to have a fairly large HR department to implement something like this. Or is it really just a way of going at it just differently if you're a department of one or two people?
Yeah, I mean, we developed it mostly, I would say, based on case studies of very large organizations. But it's very applicable. The thought process is very applicable too for a small or medium-sized HR department as well, because you still need to think about your strategy. You still need to think about who is accountable for what. What's the role of the manager, for example, in all of this? Because managers actually play a significant role, because HR is really not accountable for hiring courses. They're not really accountable for developing their teams. They can help, but the people that are really accountable for that are the managers. Without the managers and the leaders being on board, HR it's going to be an uphill battle. So how do we bring the managers on board? How do we unlock that maybe forgotten middle manager that we talked about as well, to enable them and empower them to play that role of building teams and building high-performing teams, developing their people, and all of that. So it's really applicable. The thought process is applicable for anybody. We always like to bring in examples of very large organizations that do that and do it well. And we have a great case study, for example, on the Lego Group, that toy makers that actually applied their leadership model to HR as well. And they have what they call the leadership playground. So they want to take a lead from children at play, because that's what they do for a business. Right. And they say managers are most important and leaders are most important to inspire joy, to energize people everywhere, every day, to do their best work. So they are taking a play-based approach to that, and they built their leadership playground with playground builders, and they took that same kind of approach to HR as well. So very interesting, and that's what we mean by really business and culture aligned HR and people strategy and leadership strategy, because it works really well for Lego. It wouldn't work really well for MasterCard, for example, who is a completely different organization. They're not play-based, right? So they didn't think about play, but Lego is play-based. So every company needs to kind of design their own.
That's super cool, actually.
Really fits them. Yeah, I love that story too.
So, Kathi, I'm going to do something a little bit different than I don't normally do on the show. So, Audrey, just indulge me for a second. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, a 3-parter. It's sort of like a lightning round kind of format. Perfect. And I want to start from the bottom of the org chart and work my way up. So, first question is what's the biggest mistake that younger employees, maybe newer employees, but let's just say younger employees, the Gen Zs and early millennials, biggest mistake that they make in leveraging HR?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake they do is they don't leverage HR. Honestly, they don't understand. And so that's the biggest mistake you can make, because many of them don't understand the role of HR. Maybe they heard from other people, or maybe from their parents, or maybe from their peers. HR is kind of this old school administrative thing. That's the HR police. That's only there. You only get to HR when you're in trouble, right? They come to you when you have done something wrong. So I think that's the biggest mistake that they do is they don't understand that HR is actually there to support them, to grow in your career, to support you, to develop in the direction you want to develop, because HR is critically interested in developing, especially the youngest generation, keep them engaged there, to keep them with the organization. And the number one reason why people leave the organization is actually not the manager. It's because of for lack of development, for lack of growth. Study after study shows that, and HR can help you navigate that.
So really,
that's the biggest.
What I'm hearing, Kathi, is like they think of HR as the principal's office when really it's the guidance counselor.
Exactly, that's exactly right, and it's a good way to put it. And I think that since they have that experience from school, it's not the principal's office; it is the guidance counselor. Exactly, and they don't see that.
Let's move up the org chart now. Biggest mistake that middle managers make in leveraging HR.
Yeah, I think middle managers do usually leverage HR, but they leverage them in an administrative way. So they say, I need to put this requisition into the system. Can you help me? Or I need to transfer a person. How do I do that? Or can you help me with this paperwork? Or I have like a legal topic that I need to address. They don't think about, and while HR can support that, of course, that's not the primary function. That's not the primary role that HR can do. What HR can really help you do much better so is, well, I have this requisition that I want to post for a new person. Walk me through what kind of skill set I need. Walk me through if that where I'm thinking that I need somebody is actually the skill set is even available, because maybe I'm looking for a unicorn, right? And we don't have that unicorn, or we can't afford to hire that unicorn because it goes well beyond what we can afford to pay the person. So much more consultative, much more kind of helping them walk through what are the requirements for the job, for example, rather than stick this requisition in and I'm done with that. Because maybe it's not a new job at all. Maybe it is two contractors in a project, an internal project that people can then develop their new skill sets around. And maybe I don't even need to hire somebody, right? So that kind of consulting, advising on workforce topics, not just legal issues, not just administrative stuff, but really digging deep on what is the requirement for this job, those kind of things. That's the most underutilized area that where HR can help.
And now let's go to the top of the org chart, which is what's the biggest mistake that senior leadership, the C-suite makes in using HR or not?
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest mistakes the C-suite makes is putting HR into the HR box. What I mean by that is the CHRO not being an equal member of the C-suite team to the CIO, to the CFO, to the head of sales and marketing, for example, chief marketing officer, but saying, well, we decide on the business strategy and you just execute on it. So basically not bringing the HR voice in very early on. And AI is a great example. HR has a unique opportunity to actually help the organization redesign every single job that is in the organization that will be impacted by AI. Many organizations say, well, HR, you're only here to train our people on AI, but you're not here to help us redesign our operating model, our org structure, our job and work models, because we do this on the leadership team, on the senior leadership team. You just help us execute and implement and execute change management for us. So not bringing the strategic voice of the business in, and they're an equal member and should be an equal member of the senior team, and understand the business in an equal way. We see lots of actually the best CHROs don't just have an HR background. I mentioned the Lego Group. Their CHRO, Lawrence Schuster, he has a marketing background from Google. So he came from Google in marketing, where he was leading marketing, and then he had an operations background in Lego before he went into HR. Because he understands the business extremely well, not just from an HR side, from a business side. So not tapping into that business knowledge of HR is the biggest problem that C-suite has.
It's fascinating, and I do agree with you that HR needs to have a very strong place at the table up in the C-suite. It's Kathi Enderes, and everybody, I'm going to spell this on your Twitter and your LinkedIn, Kathi, everybody, and it's Enderes. And the website for the company is joshbersin.com. Kathi, boy, we could talk for hours and hours and hours on this, but I just love the insights, and particularly for our audience, your take on those three different levels, super
Yeah.
interesting.
But one thing we didn't get to, which is, that I want to make sure that, because we talked about it early on, is that we want to talk about HR's role in reskilling, and particularly as it relates to HR, because there's a lot of people that feel like white collar jobs now they're going to be upended, by AI, and so it harkens me back then to a time back when robotics came on strong, and people and these line workers were told, well, they're not going to take your job. Everything you need to learn to work with the robots and everything like that. And eventually, then what happened was the line workers need to be reskilled into different roles because the robots were doing their job. So,
Yeah.
with people who have that kind of fear, how does HR then play a role in reskilling these people that are disrupted by HR?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. I mean, HR has an absolutely critical role to actually do the reskilling, but then also we see this actually as we call this the 4R model, and which includes HR needs to think about recruit first. So who do I recruit? How do I hire? So maybe I don't hire so many people into these roles that will eventually be disrupted, right? So thinking ahead, planning ahead to say, well, maybe we shouldn't hire so many full-time employees if we eventually that job will be disrupted or will go away. So the recruiting needs to be part of that. Retaining people, of course, as well. How can we retain people with the right skills differentially? So great example that we have there is in healthcare, where of course they have the huge nursing shortage and they don't just can't hire enough nurses. But what they are thinking about now is how do we retain people that might not have the medical skills, but maybe they have the human skills, they have the empathy, they have the patient kind of care orientation. And those could be receptionists, for example, whose job eventually will be automated. But then we can, and that's to the third R, how can we reskill them, give them the medical training, for example, to be frontline nurses. There's also a great example of actually Amazon providing training to their warehouse workers to become actually first level nurses, medical assistants. And of course, all of these warehouse workers, as you mentioned, their job will be taken by robots eventually. It's very clear. And Amazon has been doing that for 10 years. But then they place them actually into healthcare organizations. So they collaborate with Providence Health and other healthcare organizations to place them there. Huge life-changing thing, of course, too, for those people that most of them probably thought they were in data and careers where also physically very straining, not very satisfying. And now they become, if they ever dreamt of becoming a medical professional, HR can help with that, giving these like free career pathways, free education, because they know it's the only way to build for the future from within. And it's kind of a proven fact that building from within with giving people kind of this reskilling is 4 to 5 times more affordable than hiring from outside. So from a financial perspective, it also makes huge difference. It makes lots of sense. That's the reskilling. And then the fourth area that we talk about a lot is redesign and redesigning jobs and work. And you mentioned AI, of course. In the healthcare example, we saw that when AI is used, for example, in medical decisions, the kind of the strain on nursing professionals is reduced by up to 50% because now they can focus on really the most important work, the medical work, the work that they're qualified to do. We call that in healthcare, you call that work operating on the top of license. So basically that's a great concept because it means you're doing what you're uniquely qualified for. If you think about that concept of operating at top of license, it applies to any of us, right? How important that is to do the work that we're qualified to do, uniquely qualified to do, and not other work that we don't like to do that we're not uniquely qualified to do. Well, we need to redesign jobs and employment models to actually make that happen. So that 4R model is a part and parcel of what we call systemic HR as well, because we need to think about all those levers, recruit, retain, reskill, and redesign at the same time, all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about the reskilling thing. So Lee, I'm glad you asked about that. Well, Kathi, I can't thank you enough. It's been great having you on the show. It's a great topic, and we're so glad you were able to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Well, we could talk for hours for sure. So
Thanks
I
again.
appreciate your time. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.